Welcome to the Dad Show Podcast, a show all about impacting, empowering, inspiring, and uplifting information to become a better dad, husband, man, and mentor. And now, your host, Ryan Ladd.
Welcome to the Dad Show Podcast. How y'all doing? Today is part 4.
Workaround might be, at the end of the day, your ankle is still snapped in half. Like
Exactly.
you're going to have to eventually address it and fix it. And it was the same thing, you know, with everything that I was going through mentally is like I just did everything I could to distract it. But at the end of the day, like you said, when you sober up or you come down from these highs or whatever it might be, like the problem still exists. And in fact, I think the problem intensifies.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you have these recollections of not feeling that.
Yeah.
And now you're back to feeling it. And so it's just this mental like exhaustion that you face
On a roller coaster. Yeah.
And so, you know, the early years of really post high school and those first several years of college. And of course, you're also in that stage of where like, you don't know what you're doing. You're trying to figure life out. Like friends that were friends then are no longer. Things you thought to be real. I mean, heck, sometimes just getting out of our own county for the first time. I mean, we're going to UT and realizing like not everybody grew up like we did, you know? And just this overwhelmingness of not knowing who you are mixed in with the trauma of the past and just really being confused. Like I said, feeling like God wasn't there for you, feeling like, you know, I'm praying for something. You don't even often know what that is. Like you're just praying to feel better.
Yeah. Or at least just relieve some of the.
Just take something. Open the valve, man. Let the pressure go away, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, being at a place in life where you have the least amount of responsibilities ever. So it's just a very confusing time. I can't imagine kids these days in the environment. And how much they might struggle. So it was everything. Obviously from that stem, self-image complexes. I mean, it could just absolute wreck, right?
Yeah.
And so, going into those early years of college, and then I started out here at Roan State. I did a year here, and then ended up at UT. And I did a year there, and partied a lot. Had a lot of issues. Had a really really bad relationship when I was there. That certainly didn't help. Didn't do well in school. Lost that. What have you? I think going into the military was probably the first big turning point for me because it forced me to get sober.
Okay.
You know, I left, you're gone, you go to AIT, you go to basic, what have you. I went to an OSIT, MOS, military occupation specialist. I was a Cav Scout. My first unit was at Sweetwater. So I disappeared for like 9-10 weeks.
This was prior to or after?
This is after I went to UT.
Okay.
And had my first year at UT.
Okay.
Didn't do great. Lost like some scholarship stuff and funding. And so that summer, I left that June. So we ended school in May after my second year.
Okay.
And then in June, I enlisted. And so June 10th is when I started my first day at basic training. And then from June, I think until October or November, I was up at Fort Knox. And I started, I think, during that time to really unpack some things about myself. One, I was forced to get sober. So I was forced to just deal with some of the things that I'd been running from.
Yeah.
You're put into an extremely strenuous and confined, structured environment, which somebody with anxiety can often thrive in, and I did.
Yeah.
But, you know, during that time, you're alone a lot. I mean, you got the other guys, but you have no connection to the outside world. You know, you're training pretty much all day, and any downtime, you're not allowed to do anything but just sit and bask in your own thoughts and what have you. And so it just...
But doing it sober instead of...
it sober.
Yeah.
Doing it in really good physical shape. A lot of very positive things certainly came out of that. The difference, though, with the National Guard is you do all that, and then you leave and you come home.
Yeah.
And you're right back to...
Right where it all started.
Everybody that you knew 9 weeks, 10 weeks ago and left, everything that you maybe ran from that you're now having to reface. It's not like active duty where then you get, you know, assigned to a unit and you go and work out your contract or however long you decide to stay. You come back, and then now there's this like, hey, on the weekend or certain times you're going to training where you have to turn on Soldier and turn it off.
Yeah.
You know, and so that was its own, you know.
So somebody that's been out there that's dealt with what you've dealt with at an early age, that is trying to find something to numb it, to get out of, what do you recommend? Like the whole, you know, obviously dealing with it sober and not, you know, turn into substance abuse or any other thing. Like, how would you, if you had one piece of advice for somebody that is dealing with that, what would it be to help them overcome it?
I think the quicker that you can get to the root of, you know, the issue. Like for me, for the longest time, I didn't even realize it was anxiety.
Yeah.
I just felt different, and I just felt off, and I felt some days were really good and some days were really bad. You know, therapy never was real beneficial for me, but I think it was just because I didn't understand it. I think I'm sure finding a good mentor or, you know, a really solid therapist would certainly help you unpack some of those things.
Yep.
I think there's more knowledge and understanding around a lot of these topics nowadays that we maybe didn't have even just that short time ago.
Yeah.
So I imagine there's probably some more resources and stuff out there. But yeah, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, you got to pinpoint what it is.
Yeah.
Again, it goes back to the analogy of the ankle. It's like, if you don't know what's wrong with you, it's really difficult to work out a plan to remediate the issues that are caused by it. And so for me, you know, hindsight, I would have just probably seen someone or just tried to understand, like, hey, well, I know what I feel, but like, what is the culprit? Like, truly, what is the culprit? And a lot of the anxiety, again, just came from not knowing where I was going, not knowing, you know, what I should be doing. And just, it was just a lot of angles, you know, to consider. Identifying it, again, hindsight, obviously, prayer, you know, finding a great pastor or, again, mentor or somebody that can just help you. You know, I wish I had me now, then.
Yeah.
So just, you know, trying to find somebody that's had a similar experience or something like that.
We felt that
extremely beneficial.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just going to say, we found that with our kids' disease. Like, you know, we went through it and we're like, we don't really, because there was a lot of negativity. Yeah. It was a Facebook group, and there was just a lot of hardened parents, you know, that had a lot of negativity in that group on Facebook about their disease. And then we was just like, no, we're not going to associate. Like, I don't want the negativity. We're going to focus on our child and we're going to move on that way. So it's kind of the same aspect as you. Once we got with families that had the same disease, that had been through the same stuff, had been through the hospital stays, the bone marrow transplants, the surgeries, yada, yada, yada. Like, it was like family, man. Like, it just brought, it was unbelievable, the connection that we had with these families, because you didn't have to explain yourself, you know, like everybody you meet that hasn't been through that, you have to explain exactly where you've come from, what you've been through, and it feels like you're telling the same old story. But when you connect with somebody that's been through it and knows exactly the feeling of it, man, you don't have to explain it. They already know. And that connection is... So please, if you're out there and you're struggling with something, no matter what it is, try to find, there's tons of Facebook groups for other stuff, like asking your community, your pastor, somebody that you can connect with, because I promise you it will help you so much if you can just find that person and that group or whatever it may be. I'm sure there's nonprofits for most of everything as well, but find a resource. I'm begging you not to resort to substance abuse, to working your life away, to everything. Just like Matt said, hit it head on and go after it. Yes, it's going to suck. Yes, it's going to be hard, but it'll be a whole lot better for you.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, and you're exactly right. I mean, even as I look back early then, again, this was all pre, you know, moving out to Tech and moving out to Cookeville, which is really kind of, I know we may edit this around to make it all make a linear sense, if you will, but there was a lot that took place before I ever uprooted and moved. And when I uprooted and moved, well, everything I'd distracted myself with up to this point, drugs and alcohol, girls, hobbies, sports, I think in high school was obviously a big one.
Yeah.
And then running from it, going to Cookeville, and then what ended up, happening in Cookeville and the business and all, like it all was running. Yeah. Every bit of it was running.
Yeah.
It was just, how can I distract?
Yep.
And it obviously,
now it makes more sense.
It obviously wasn't until way later in my life that I was forced to, and we'll get back to kind of like I said earlier, when the wheels really started to fall off. And I think God forced me to be like, hey, you can't run anymore. Like, if you're going to run, it needs to be to me. And that was, I'd ran everywhere else, but ran to him, and he'll get your attention.
Yeah.
He doesn't fail at that. Yeah. And some people, unfortunately, it takes getting to that point. So I guess to go back and answer your question again, I would just goes back to identifying, the root problem and not running, run to him, lean into, and really try to understand, and it's just something I didn't do. I just distracted. Everything was a distraction.
Yeah.
And it's why I've become so obsessed with things. It's why, and again, as I've learned to channel those later in life, it's been rewarding in some ways. But early on it was just whatever I could distract myself with.
Yeah.
To numb the pain and the anxiety.
And I have to say, like, if I'm going to add something to that, one of the main things that I took, actually I'm going to say two things. One of them was, a guy at work. I was kind of new beginning in my faith, almost like a brand new baby deer trying to walk is how I looked trying to walk with God. And a guy at work told me, we just found out about Kennedy and knew about that. And he's like, Ryan, like, you're trying to walk with God. You're trying to do everything and you're praying to him, but there's going to come a day when you're not going to be able to pray. But I want you to know that God understands your tears. And me being me, I was like, dude, whatever. Like, no matter how hard I'm crying, no matter what, I can always say a prayer in the back of my head. And it hit me one day. Yeah. I was at home and I was crying so hard that, and this was very early on with us finding out Kennedy's diagnosis, that I just hit my knees, dude, and I threw my hands up. Yeah. And it was literally like God reached down and picked that weight off of me immediately. And I was able to stand up and do what I was doing. And so from that moment on, I just, when I stood up, I said, God, I can't handle this here. And I took my hands and made the motion of giving my daughter to God, because I can't handle it, but you can. I'm just her earthly father. You, her ultimate father. She's yours first. Yeah. Your will be done. And so whether that's a child or whatever you're dealing with, or, anything of that nature, I ask that, not only do you turn to God, not only do you turn to that group like we talked about, but I mean, and it may be, people may be laughing, may be stupid to think, but man, when you take the motion of literally handing it to God and telling him to take it, it feels like he takes it, man. And so I was able to do more stuff, be stronger for my wife and for my daughter through everything that we've been through.
Oh, 100%. And I think you're exactly right. I mean, the thing I would add to that is that, like, I find that I have to do that very often because I'm still very immature in my walk. Yeah. Like extremely immature. I find myself falling into those same tendencies, I find myself allowing myself to be distracted. It's not as intense today. It's not as detrimental. It can be, humor or whatever. It's obviously it's matured in that aspect to some degree. But at the end of the day, a distraction is a distraction. Like, does it really matter what it is? But I say that to say, like, I still to this day struggle with, I don't want to say forgetting, but like forgetting how I got here and who I am and why I am and where my faith is. And so I think, I said earlier, like I have this idea early on of like I was using God. It was like when things got bad, it did seem like it was a ripcord.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And hindsight, I've said that a million times, but he has pulled me out of each one of those occurrences. And it's probably been about a year ago I really started thinking. In fact, I talked to JT about, I was like, man, one day I would love to write a song, as nerdy as that is, about this concept of using God.
Yeah.
Because that's really what he died for.
Yeah.
You know? And, you know, I felt so ashamed for the times where I've, you know, gotten to this point and I've come back and I've used him. Right. But it's like, I have this like scenario that plays out in my head of like him standing there being like, it's literally why I died.
Yeah.
So my perception around that has changed. Now it's become more of like, how do I become more stable on the day to day of not having to have this feeling of like, hey, I'm leveraging his grace.
Yeah.
Right. But there is, I think, an aspect of that where he's like, every time he's like, when you come back, that's what I want.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
But the time, like I said, when I really just said I'm done, that's when it was rough. And at some point I will cry during this podcast.
No, you're good.
I'm trying not to. But,
no, you're great.
But yeah, so again, going back, your original question was all this is like, how did we get back here to Kingston? So I left Roan State, UT, not good, military, you know, an attempt at suicide when the pressure, you know, was just too intense to handle. You know, thank God for my cousin and his protection over me during that time. Struggled, uprooted, went to Cookeville, and everything that, you know, ended up playing out there. I ended up finding success in school. I did graduate 2013. And to go back to the how did, you know, the things work out with Kaylee? We were best friends all through college. I tried to date her multiple times. So we have a funny story because I asked her out on a text message. And she says that's why she said no, but that's not why she said no. It was completely appropriate to ask someone on a date via text message.
Oh yeah. Now people
no.
call in sick to work on text message.
Yeah. What are we talking? What are we doing here? So we ended up best friends. But really the truth is that everyone graduated and, you know, we all started kind of to figure out what was next in life, and that chapter was closing. And so we all were getting jobs, and I had gotten a job at Enterprise Rent a Car, and Kaylee had, she'd been working, but she had been interviewing elsewhere, and she interviewed for a job out here in Knoxville. And, I was at training in Nashville for Enterprise, and we had been texting, and she, like I said, I've been trying to get her to date me, and, everybody had left. Our friend group had left, and we really were the only two left in Cookeville. So we were still going out and hanging out, but it was just as friends. And, she was on her way back, and she was texting me, and I was like, how did it go? And she was like, oh, I think it went really great. Maybe an hour later or something, she texted me. She said, hey, I just got a call from this company, and they want to make me a job offer. And so I'm like, well, there it goes. There's my chance. That ship's sailing. And I texted her and I said, well, did you take it? And she said,
thank you for coming to watch part 4 and come back tomorrow for part 5. Thank you for listening to the Dad Show podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Dad Show podcast. Please like, review, and subscribe.